Alright, we're back at it again. So, I allowed the machine to run up till about midnight last night, and I shut it off. I was real close to, because I don't know what that gauge really reads to, and I don't know exactly what's going on, I thought it was in my best interest to shut that thing off because I didn't want alarms going off at like 3 o'clock in the morning. I was correct in my assumption that once this thing got a certain amount of pressure in it, it was going to start to get exponentially, it was going to start to fill exponentially faster. And I was correct. So basically what happened was about 9 o'clock last night, it hit, on that gauge, it hit about 1,000 PSI. And every hour up till midnight, it started to go up more. Whereas before, it sat for at least a good 5 hours and didn't do anything. So so the next step here is I need to calibrate my gauges. So I figured, what the hell, I might as well get that on tape because why not? Now I have a brand new set of Smith's gauges right here that I got. I shot a video on these. These are brand new gauges. And before the safety Nazis give me a bunch of shit, because this bottle's not tied down, oh, fine. You know what? If this thing tips over, the valve snaps off, and I catch it on video, I'll make America's Funny Videos. Alright, so, we're going to do that. I took the safety cap off. I'm going to give it a quick purge, look in the hole. Mud wasps like to make nests in here. Not nearly as much as they like to make nests in propane tanks, but they will do it in an oxygen bottle too. Wasps like to get up inside the safety caps too, because they're evil. Alright, so we got that tight-ish. I actually own a bottle wrench. This is a dedicated bottle wrench. Option 2 is an adjustable wrench, which I'm not really a big fan of. That would be how I created this mess. That's my old oxygen nipple there. That was a combination of giant channel locks and crappy adjustable wrench. I hate adjustable wrenches. They have their use, but not in my garage. So, like I said, this bottle here is factory charged. When I opened it up, when I was using it the other day, it had somewhere around 2,000 PSI in it. So, let's ease that in. So this bottle has, alright, so this is 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. Okay, so the 16, 17, 18. It says 1,800 PSI in it, according to this gauge. Now, I'm going to write that down because I can't remember anything anymore. Turn it back on just to make sure. Yeah, that's about as close. That's as close as I need it to be. Now I'm going to purge the oxygen out because if you try to disconnect a charged line, it fights against you. Now I'm going to have to move the bottle because the way I have my torch plumbed in, I can't move it. So I'm kind of jammed up over here. I'm actually going to put this bottle here and leave it here. intentionally left little to no slack in this system because I don't really know why, other than I just like it to look tight. And, 1700 psi. So these two gauges, the Harris gauges and the Miller gauges, or 1800. Did I say 17 or 18? So this is 1800. Exactly the same. Bleed that off. I hate doing this kind of stuff when I have working projects going on. Now, this valve is off. This check valve won't allow gas to go back into the thing. So when I came out here last night, I was somewhere around 1000 psi. A little bit above 1000 psi, maybe like 1200 on this gauge. So the next thing I gotta do, this valve is closed, this check valve is closed, I'm gonna bleed this one off. That sounds like a lot of psi there. Now for kind of the moment of truth here. I am a little twitchy about this bottle, not having a cap on it and me being clumsy. Let me see here. I've never had the top snap off of one of those. If you would, I would have talked about it because I'm a fan of I told you so. Now, moment of truth. I'm actually going to disconnect this. Just in case for some reason one of these check valves isn't working properly, I want to make sure that it's just this hose that gets charged. That's closed, that's closed. $1,500. So this gauge is 300 psi off. Now, how do I adjust that? Okay. We're going to get back to this. So this gauge here is it's a very simple gauge. It's a very simple design. Inside of here, there's a little metal balloon, for the sake of argument, that's got a curl in it. When it gets pressure inside of here, it moves. And when it moves, there's a little gear, there's usually a little set of gears in here that move the needle. And a couple springs and shit like that. Clock type work inside of here. Now, for the sake of transparency, I have to admit that I already did this, but I want to show how I did it. What I'm going to do is, I don't want to say sketchy, but it's definitely, the high end of this gauge is more important to me than the low end of this gauge. So what I'm going to do is, and this is actually what I read from a gauge calibration site. I'm going to take the faceplate off. Now there's no oil in this, so you can just unscrew the plastic faceplate. I whipped out my watchmaker's tools, including my little loop here, which I actually don't need. So my little loop here. These little tiny pry bars are made specifically to remove the hands of a watch. And basically what I'm working on here is an oversized watch. So I very carefully went in here and I pried up on the gate on the needle, and it popped right off. This just pushes on to this little pin here. This is actually huge compared to some of the things I've worked on over the years. There's no gears or anything inside of here. At least I don't think there is. Let's take a look real quick, but it's not broached. No, it's just a smooth shaft. I guess I could take the faceplate off just to show what it looks like inside. I did a little bit of research on this before I decided to take it apart. One of the things that I'm fairly certain about is that there's a possibility that the reason this gauge is off is atmospheric pressure. So I bought this from Bend, Oregon, and the air pressure in Bend, Oregon is 3,600 feet above sea level. Yep, there it is. So you can see inside of here, there's this tube here, and then there's gears and a spring and all kinds of little gizmos in here that make all this work. So when this tube bends just a little bit, it moves the gauge. So there you go. That's what you always wanted to know, what the inside of a pressure gauge looked like. That's what it looks like. This happens to be a tube, a bent little tube like this. Some of the other ones I've seen, some of the other ones I've worked on have had, they have like a balloon inside of them. They were the older ones. I forget what brand they were, but I've taken these apart before just because I wanted to see what was inside them. So I'm going to put the faceplate back on. I don't want any cigarette ashes in there, so I'm going to drop the faceplate back on. My screwdriver is magnetic when it wants to be, and it doesn't want to be magnetic at all. Wow, have another cup of coffee. I'm being relatively careful here. This gauge is probably, I mean, I only paid $115 for this whole whip hose, and not for nothing. I see $115 worth of parts. You know, the assembly of these, even buying cheap Amazon parts or making them yourself out of, you know, there's probably $50 worth of material in this thing, if not more. These gauges are relatively inexpensive. You know, they have, this one's printed with their brand logo on it. All right, so the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to actually mount the gauge back on the bottle. Now, actually, this is a great visual example of how this gauge works. So when I turn this valve on, so nothing's off, I purged all the gas out of the valve. This fitting is tight. I didn't leak check it, but it's tight enough for what I'm doing. So I'm going to turn the valve on, and this hose is going to move. Did you see it move? It moved. And now when I let the pressure off, it's going to move again. All right. So that is a large example of how this pressure gauge works. So I'm going to repressurize it. All right. So we're back up to pressure. I can actually feel air coming out of that. But that's okay. It doesn't need to be super tight because we're not losing that much air. I'm going to grab my needle here for my gauge, and I'm going to put it back on at, put it back on at 1500 psi. I'm sorry, 1800 is where it wants to be. Oh, that thing just dropped right on. Crapola. Now this is another great example of you always wanted to be around when I screw up. So this I'm just going to use my fingers. So this needle wants to be at, because I have two other controls. I'm going to reset the needle. Have another cup of coffee, Feathers. Wow, I'm glad I'm not putting a watch together. All right, so I very, very, very carefully just gently set that on there. I'm going to bump it. I'm going to hold it. Maybe I need a drink. I did have 4 cups of coffee already today. So. Okay, so now it's set at as close to 1800 psi as I can get, and I'm just going to push it on the rest of the way. I just use my fingers. I actually have a tool to do that for watches. Now I'm going to shut the valve off, and let's see if the gauge goes to 0. I hope it does. Bingo, we're at 0. We're going to turn it back on. We're at a little bit less than 1800 psi. That's perfectly acceptable for what I'm doing. All right, we're going to bleed it back off. Okay, that's it. Now, my assumption is that this gauge was calibrated at 3,600 feet and not at sea level. I'm basically at sea level here. As a matter of fact, I'm as close to sea level as you can get and not be in New Orleans. I'm right in the Delaware River Basin. So they call it the Delaware Valley for a reason. There's a creek that runs behind my house, and we're not in the mountains. Oops. Okay, so that's screwed back on. We're good to go. That's how you calibrate your pressure gauge on your Priest Precision whip hose. Like I said, it helps to have controls. So, my control is this tank and my other 2 sets of gauges. I'm going to put everything together because I got in the mail today my replacement tee. And now here's the real gag on this. Yoink. This is made by the same company that makes this whip hose. When I ordered the whip hose from eBay, it never occurred to me to actually order this piece from them also. I don't know why I didn't, but I didn't.